Today, I want to delve into one of the bloodiest battle rifles in history that still happens to see action to this day. The M1 Garand, one of the most iconic rifles from World War II. And honestly, it's pretty easy to see why. The Garand was invented by John Cantius Garand. He was born on New Year's Day of 1888 in St. Remy, Quebec. He would move on to Connecticut in 1898, and at the age of 11, he would begin working in textile mills, learning from the machinists that worked there. Here, he would find interest in tool making and find hobbies in target shooting and gun design. World War I would begin in 1914. The U.S. would be poised to begin involvement in 1917 and would lead to a huge surge in war technology: tanks, poison gas, and machine guns. Garand would take an interest in an announcement of the bidding for a light machine gun. Garand by this time was working in New York City. He would find another designer by the name of John Cantius. The two would form a partnership, and in June of 1918 they would present a prototype to Hudson Maxim, the brother of Hiram Maxim, another prominent gun designer of the time. Hudson would recommend that Garand and Cantius demonstrate their design to the Naval Consulting Board. The NCB would send the two designers to the Army War College. This would continue until the two were in front of the Ordnance Department. However, this first attempt would be turned down. After this rejection, they returned to the NCB, where they were paid to continue developing the design. This started in August of 1918 and would end 3 months before the end of World War I in November 1919. The first model of the final design was produced in 1919, almost a year after the war. Garand would impress officials with his skill and would be given a position as a consulting engineer with Springfield. Taking this position in November of 1919 and settling in Springfield, Massachusetts, he would become an American citizen. After some years, he would eventually take a position as chief civilian engineer. Here, John would continue to work on his design. The T1E2, a modification of the design in 1926, would become the accepted U.S. semi-automatic rifle and be designated M1 on 3 August 1933. The M1 would replace the M1903 Springfield as the standard service rifle. However, the M1903A4 would continue to remain as a marksman rifle until 1944. John would continue working with Springfield and the Ordnance Department until he retired in 1953. He died in 1974, still living in Springfield, Massachusetts. The M1 Garand would see many different models, many of which would never see active military use. There are 37 different known variants of the M1 Garand. The most well-known are, of course, the M1, M1E5, or the Tanker's Garand, the M1E7, or the M1C Sniper, the M1E8, M1D, or another sniper, the T26, the PWB. We'll spend some time talking about these models today. But for the rest of the history, the M14, a direct descendant of the M1 Garand, would replace it as the standard rifle in 1958. However, the M1 Garand would remain in service to some degree until the early 1970s. But after World War II, we would start selling the M1 Garand to our allies. Our allies would use the M1 Garand as a service rifle for a considerable amount of time. As a matter of fact, the M1 Garand is still in use by some military drill teams. These include the U.S. Marine Corps Silent Drill Team, some ROTC corps, and, of course, His Majesty the King's Guard of Norway. Due to widespread United States military assistance and the durability of the M1 Garand, they have been found in use in recent conflicts such as the insurgencies in Iraq and Afghanistan. The M1 Garand is a woodstock battle rifle standardly chambered in .30-06. This is a gas-operated firearm that utilizes a drilled gas port. It has an internal magazine that holds 8 rounds encased in an end-block clip. You load it by pushing the clip into the magazine with your thumb. Once the clip is in place, the bolt automatically comes forward and chambers the first round. There is a potential to get your thumb caught between the bolt and the chamber if you let it linger, causing what's known as Garand thumb. The safety is positioned at the front of the trigger guard. It was capable of having a sling and bayonet on pretty much all standard models. I was able to find information on the M7 grenade launcher that was attached to the end of the barrel. One of the most interesting accessories to this firearm is the winter trigger, which allowed soldiers to pull the trigger with an extension that went outside of the guard. This allowed shooting when dexterity was low due to cold and with a heavily gloved hand. Now we're going to talk about some of the variants. The first one up is the M1E5. The history behind this gun is that the M1 carbine, great firearm, was never intended for a frontline rifle. Instead, the Army had envisioned it as a personal defense weapon. However, it was well received by the troops despite lacking the firepower of the M1 Garand. By 1943, there were increasing calls from troops in all theaters for a handier carbine version of the M1 Garand. Colonel Reen Studler, the chief of ordnance, directed Springfield Armory to develop a suitable carbine for service issue. The M1E5 was born out of this. The barrel was shortened to 18 inches from the standard 24, and a folding stock, much like the M1A1 carbines, was introduced. The overall length with the stock extended was 37.5 inches, and the carbine weighed 8.4 pounds. It's still heavier than the 5-pound and 36-inch M1 carbine, but lighter and more compact than the Garand at 9.6 pounds and 43.5 inches. Initially, the carbine did not have a pistol grip. However, at the Aberdeen Proving Grounds, it was recommended that it receives a pistol grip, and the change was made and it was retrofitted. Now, the M1E5 was never accepted by the U.S. military. There is only one true M1E5. That is the prototype that was built for the testing. In the current market today, the Tanker's Garand, or the M1E5, is currently being sold as though it was a military weapon. The reason that the widespread Tanker's Garand is such a phenomenon, after World War II, a company came about that started selling the M1 Garands to civilians. The gentleman that ran the business had some knowledge of the M1E5's existence. He would then take charge and start manufacturing the M1E5 out of parts that he received for the M1 Garand. This would include destroyed receivers that they would weld together into functional M1 Garand receivers. They would then alter the firearm to be as close to the M1E5 as they can get. This firearm was then marketed as the M1E5 Tanker's Garand. The M1C sniper variant with a 2x magnification M73 scope, or later the M81, was affixed to the left side of the receiver, requiring a leather cheek pad to properly position the shooter's face behind the offset scope. The M1D sniper variant with the M82 scope was attached to the rear of the barrel, allowing quick removal of the scope, but similarly requiring the leather cheek pad. Finally, we get to the Pacific Warboard variant. The PWB rifle was another attempt to make a carbine M1 Garand. PWB would send the Ordnance Department some of the modified rifles that they made and request that these be issued, or at least made so they could be issued. This created the T26 variant. The T26 variant would go through a bunch of other testing, much like the M1E5. However, the trial units that used these basically said that the gun's not fit for war, either due to increased muzzle flash or increased blast. They just did not want these rifles to see the front lines. There are only 3 known T26 PWB rifles. There are multiple other variants that are all very small changes made to the standard M1 Garand. However, one that may be interesting to all of you is the T31, the experimental bullpup variant. All right, so my final thoughts are M1 Garand is the granddaddy battle rifle of everything. It's probably my favorite battle rifle in all of history. If you happen to have one of these, take good care of it. For it to consistently be in war from World War II, basically spawned after World War I, and make it all the way through Vietnam, and then still end up in frickin' Afghanistan, it's a good rifle. Take care of it.